Well, I don't want to glaze over the struggle that was the remainder of 2020 because it was, without a doubt, the hardest time in my life. I thought I knew challenge and struggle, and but going back to that day, I was sitting at the desk in New York, like, I'm not being challenged enough. Well, you get what you wish for, let me tell you, because I saw my dad struggling with this. He had done his thing. He turned around the sugar business with Alma, became a legend, as you've heard, and he's nearing 70. He's like, this is not my bag. Like, I don't market brands. Like, I'm bulk,
Right.
through my work in the art world and having done art business, but also, marketing and just thinking of things, of branding like that. I said, okay, you need help. I'm here. Like, forget my career I've been working toward for 12 years. I'm needed here. And this is my dad. This is my family. Because my entire extended family essentially is invested in the distillery, and so is Alma. And so it was like this call of duty that I'd never felt before.
We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. B1 Bank knows that entrepreneurs like you are always thinking one step ahead. So you need banking solutions that can keep up. It begins with lending. Does your business need working capital or financing for new equipment? How about a real estate or a construction loan? Good news, the B1 lending team is ready to learn your goals and help you find the best lending option available. Now let's talk about uncomplicating your daily cash flow. B1 offers a full array of treasury management services that let you collect funds faster, pay funds more efficiently, and access your information with powerful online tools. Most importantly, B1 understands the value of working with local nonprofits to build a stronger community. They believe in giving back through hands-on involvement with their B1 Community Outreach Program because it's simply the right thing to do. B1 Bank. Be uncomplicated. To learn more, visit b1bank.com. Equal housing lender, member FDIC. Hello, I'm Andrew McClendon, your host of the Next Entrepreneur Podcast. We're here today in the Propel Production Podcast Studio in Baton Rouge, and we welcome our guest, Miss Olivia Stewart. Olivia, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming in. Why don't we start by you telling us, you're the Chief Operating Officer of Three Roll Estate. Why don't you start by telling us what Three Roll Estate is?
Sure. Three Roll Estate is my family's single estate distillery. Single estate meaning we own the entire process from the cane that we grow, the mill in which it's processed, to the distillery where we ferment and distill and bottle.
Now, how rare is that, the single estate part of it?
We are the only one in Louisiana, without a doubt, of any spirit. And there are very, very few of any spirit in the country, let alone of sugarcane and rum. Of course, sugarcane can only be grown in a very small pockets of the country, South Louisiana and Florida being essentially the two.
Right. And so you have a tasting room and distillery, that's downtown.
Mm-hmm. Our tasting room's open Thursday to Sunday. We do tours, tastings, a full bar with cocktails. We host private events. On our tours, you can see, we'll cut cane out of the front of our building and run it through a three-roll mill, which is where we get our name from. So guests can get that experience of tasting fresh sugarcane juice, which it's baffling to me how many South Louisianians come in and have never chewed on sugarcane.
Yeah.
I mean, it's heartbreaking, really.
I remember doing it as a kid. I have no idea where we got it from, but
yeah.
Lainey went to your tasting room when was that, Lainey? Sunday? Yeah, so she was raving about it.
Did you do a tour?
I did.
Taste from the barrel? Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah, but it's been really cool if looking back over the last 10 to 15 years and you look at all the explosion of microbreweries and craft distilleries It's been really interesting and probably disruptive to, the norm prior to that. And
Absolutely.
then it seems like everyone gets into it, right? I mean, you see these celebrities, George Clooney with Casamigos and Rock Johnson with Terramana and Michael Jordan and others.
You know more than I do.
Well, those are all tequilas, right?
Right.
And they, but they publish, they do so much social media around all that stuff. Peyton Manning is in, so many celebrities, and some of them have like sold out for $1 gazillion, like George Clooney. And it's like, well, that looks kind of fun. But I suspect it looks romantic from the outside. I suspect it's a lot of hard work behind the scenes. So I'm looking forward to digging into that.
Yeah, it is. I actually came from the art world. So it's kind of similar in that respect.
How is that? It doesn't sound similar.
Well, similar in that it is kind of romanticized from the outside. And it's a tricky industry that's a little... I don't want to say lawless, because definitely in alcohol there's a lot more laws than in the art world, but just navigating it as you go along and realizing that the day-to-day is not nearly as fun and interesting as it seems, but nonetheless you do it because you love it. It's people look at the art world, or even like you were just saying with all of these buyouts in the craft spirits industry, you're very lucky if you reach that point. Mostly it's a grind, and you're not getting paid that much. You're not making that much money, but you do it because you love it.
Well, and it's handmade. It's something you created.
Exactly.
But I also see that the correlation with art, and that it's a lot of creativity involved, right? And I mean, you can, if you look at the number of spirits that you guys have, that all has to come from the imagination, and creating that must be incredibly fun.
Yeah, it's a combination of art and science, which I really appreciate, and I grew up appreciating, because sugar production is very much the same way. The sugar boilers, as we call them, they're the guys up on the pan floor. I'm going to use a lot of jargon here.
Yeah, man.
Bear with me, but they're inspecting each crystal, all the crystals as they start to form, and to make sure there's no spontaneous growth. And of course, back in the day, it was more art. Now we have a lot more science, but it is still, the guys up there have been doing it for generations. Their family has been. It's been passed down. And distilling is very much the same way, though what you are seeing more today is this idea of a master distiller being, this old white guy in overalls, and his great-grandfather was a moonshiner. That's really changing, which I appreciate and I love. You have this new generation of distillers coming in. A lot of times they have chemical engineering backgrounds or microbiology backgrounds, because that's essentially fermentation. And it's really exciting to see who's coming in, and the diversity of gender and race, and it's something that the craft spirits industry really is embracing. It has a lot of work to do, but is embracing.
So at one point it was definitely a male-dominated field, was it not?
Yes.
And
still is. So is the art world. When you're talking about the tippy top, at the end of the day, it's funny. All my art history classes would be all women, but then I worked on the business side of the art world in New York, and the top gallery owners, by majority, the top dealers setting the prices and buying the artwork at that hundreds of $1 million level is, it's a closed circle.
Yeah. I think about the microbreweries that I've been to in the past, and, talk about it being male dominated, and you go into, I'm thinking like Breckenridge Brewery, and you go in there and they have these, massive tanks and valves and pipes and fittings and gauges, and you're just like, oh man, that's cool.
Yeah.
I want one of those.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean,
It's glorified factory work.
Yeah.
Somehow one distiller put it well.
I mean, I can see why it's, you know, male dominated because, you know, it's cool mechanical stuff, you know.
But I've learned as I visit more and more distilleries and come to know all these bigger brands that they have, their head distillers are female or their master blenders are female. Especially in rum in the Caribbean, I'm seeing that trend, and it's really amazing.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So let's find out how you as a woman got in the business. But before we get right into that, let's just kind of dial it back on some of the family history, because we talked about you being vertically integrated and, you know, you call it from cane to glass, right? So from the growing the cane to the harvesting to the milling, the distilling, and bottling, the whole thing.
Cane to glass.
Yeah, that's so cool. So when did your family start in the business?
In the sugarcane business, they started in 1859.
1859.
And that was my great-great-grandfather. And since then, it's remained in my family, both in ownership and operation. My father is the president and CEO today, has been for my entire life, and having grown up out there, born and raised on the farm, and just being a witness to that, especially every fall come harvest, and when he would come home at the end of the day and seeing the sacrifice and the struggle and how he would come home with engineering textbooks. I mean, he didn't have a college degree. Sorry, Dad. But he hated school. He dropped out of LSU after the first semester. And because he knew, he grew up on the farm just like I did, and he knew that's what he wanted to do. And he knew there was no better way to learn and to know it than being there.
Yeah.
That perseverance is something that started in 1859 with my great-great-grandfather. And every person that has ever worked on Alma and on that land, there's a commonality of perseverance that continues today. Even the year I was born, we were the dead last mill in the state. Dead last. And
at that time there was like 18 or
18 mills, 1990. And, you know, it was kind of, we were essentially at a crossroads. Either we can't have another year like this, you know, so we're closing, or something
and
changes.
you're dead last measuring tonnage of sugar milled.
Right. Production, tonnage of cane milled.
Cane milled.
Cane ground.
So that would be the cane that you grew on Alma, the family farm.
Yeah.
Plus all the other farmers that would process.
Right. Plus our other, at that time, I can't give you a firm number of how many growers we had. I'm sure it was closer to 20.
Yeah.
Something as small as that. Now we have 52. We do not go outside of a certain radius. The mill pays the freight, so we don't want to go too far out, keep our costs down. We've just grown and expanded over the years. And it's just funny because that was the year I was born, so all I ever knew growing up was that perseverance. Yeah. And you keep going and you don't quit and you look at the data. This is everything I learned from my dad. And it's better to try and be criticized on how you're doing it and fail than to not try it all.
I was talking with a friend of mine, David Hatcher, who's in the sugar business, and that he sells chemicals that are used in the processes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we're not organic, sorry.
But he said, you know, your father's reputation as far as creating a very efficient mill, you know, he was at the top of his game. Mm-hmm. Par excellence is the term he used. And I read about that where, you know, so you went from being dead last in production in 1990 when there are 18 mills to
first
being
last year
the most productive mill out there. So
we actually won. So there's been this age-old tradition that I didn't even know about. No one in my family knew about except, you know, my dad. But since the 1800s, even, there's been this tradition in the Louisiana sugarcane industry of a set of deer horns that's a trophy that gets gifted or bestowed upon the mill that grinds the most cane. No one knew about it because another mill has had it for 30 years running. And then it was another group before that. Usually the same group or mill hangs on to it. And we had no idea about it until grinding was over this past year. And my dad nonchalantly tells us, and we're like, what? Deer horns? And it's this huge, beautiful plaque. And the numbers, the plaques on it go back to the 30s. But, that's when that set of horns replaced the older set from the 1800s. So we broke this other mill's 30-year streak as of this past year. And we only have one tandem of mills, which is 6 sets of 3-roll mills. That's a standard. And that other mill has 2, essentially, a diffuser and a tandem. So we ground, and it just points to efficiency, right? Not necessarily volume, adding on more, but what do we do with what we have without an exorbitant amount of CapEx? Let's look at the data and our efficiency. I mean, we have the best lab in the state, par none. And we look at those numbers, the bricks, the purity, the mud, all the impurities, etc., at every step of the way, from the field to the crystal.
So how many employees are in that operation?
Off season, it's about 150. And then on season, which is September to January, we go up to about 350, almost 400.
Now, is that in the mill or is that including harvesting?
It includes out in the fields as well.
You're harvesting.
Which isn't as big of a team because we have combine harvests, and then fertilizing is done in the tractor as well. And then we have ripener applied starting about now, and that's done with a crop duster.
Wow. That's fascinating business. The other thing my friend told me was how green and sustainable your business is, and that you're using a byproduct as fuel stock for the furnace that runs a boiler, that runs a turbine, that runs the plant.
Exactly. You got it.
Which is very cool.
Yeah. So, and actually that's how it's been done for hundreds of years. The pulp left over after you crush the cane 6 times under an exorbitant amount of pressure, you're left with a very brittle, dried out pulp. And that's called bagasse. And what we do with that every year is we burn about 90% of it that we make in furnaces that heat up water pipes to create steam, and that gets channeled back to each steam turbine engine that is attached to each of the 6 mills, the sets.
I would love to come see this.
You should. You have an open invite, but November is the best time because it gets really hot.
Yeah.
But yeah, so essentially that is an entirely closed system. With the mill tandem itself, we still use electricity to power the rest of the mill. But in fact, the exhaust steam coming off of that will then redirect into the processing plant side of things in the mill. After all of the cane is crushed, then we have juice that we have to heat up and stabilize. That's done with exhaust steam. Then it goes through a set of evaporators to boil off excess water. That's where our cane syrup comes in. And then that cane syrup goes into another set of boiling that is done under vacuum, which is created from exhaust steam.
Man, love it. So you talked about watching your dad work and seeing that persistence. And, you know, my kids are grown, but I at some point I began to realize as a parent, and I have said this on the podcast before, that I've developed this theory that your kids learn not so much from what you try to tell them or teach them that way, but more so from watching you work and what you do and how you lead your life. And then they want to, if you're lucky, they want to emulate that.
Yeah.
Seeing your father work it sounds like, put in a good, strong work ethic.
Mm-hmm. And I have to give my mom credit too. She worked as well. Things always depended on the elements and also, natural gas too, which we have on our land. And when that went away, she always instilled that in us as well. So having both of those examples, especially as a young girl, it undoubtedly speaks to who I am today, who my, family is today. So I don't know where I would be without that example from both of them.
We would like to thank MBD Automation for their support of the Next Entrepreneur podcast. MBD Automation is a mechanical install contractor with a program-centric focus. So what do these guys do? They install conveyor systems, VRCs, platforms, singulators, sorters, and all sorts of other types of automated equipment. Who do they work for? They work for systems integrators, manufacturers, and end users in fulfillment centers, airports, mail processing facilities, and projects in the defense industry. MBD Automation works for numerous Fortune 500 companies across the United States and has a list of international clients that they perform work for in the U.S. as well. If MBD Automation can help you on your next project, you can find them online at mbdautomation.com. Growing up on the farm, that must have been quite an experience. It reminds me of a guest we had, Daryl Smith, who also grew up in West Baton Rouge Parish.
We're in Point Capit Parish.
You were in Point Capit then. He grew up on a big farm, and hearing him talk about looking around and going, one day I liked it. I want to have this, like it was inspirational to him to see what his family had in the way of their land and their crops and stuff like that. And he certainly did that. So tell us a little bit what a day in the life looked like when you were a kid.
I didn't have that moment when I was a kid, not until I came back to run the distillery, which I'll get to. But nonetheless, growing up out there, my siblings were 7 and 9 years older than me. So I kind of was left to my own devices, me and my dog Maple. And, we would just wander through the fields. I would pretend that I was a runaway kid. And even like you see in the cartoons and you tie up a little satchel on the end of a stick. I remember purposefully wandering out in the fields, thinking like, I'll show my parents and I'm going to run away. And they never came looking for me. So I eventually had to go back for dinner. But it was, looking back, it's something you don't realize is different until you get out in the world,
right.
And we still have our commissary, our general store there. And I would just go there with my dog and help check out people or like stow away in the little storage cubbies. And then during harvest, I would go into the lab that I was talking about and one of the women who worked in there, she was she took care of me. She lived across the street. She was the chief engineer's wife, and they were from Panama. And they moved actually and started working on Alma the year I was born. So we kind of had this coming up together, watching Alma go from dead last to first. And so that they helped watch me, and I grew up with them. My first word was in Spanish because of them. So I would go in there into the lab and be like, "Puedo ayudar?" Can I help? And, we would test, she would show me how to test the bricks on the juice that would come in, and which of course, was on a digital machine, and I would write it into the charts, and just as a real young kid.
Doings, huh?
Yeah. I had no idea what I was really doing, but just being around that and being part of it, I loved it. I really loved it. And then, but I guess I grew up with this predisposition that, this is I'm not going to take this over one day. It's something that men do.
Right.
So it never really...
it's pretty hardcore stuff, right?
Oh, yeah. It's definitely and I saw myself as more of a creative, and I also just wanted to get out of Baton Rouge, get out of Lakeland. I was going to I always went to school in Baton Rouge, and as I started coming up into high school, I just wanted to get out, get far away. Went to boarding school, went to college out of state, and studied abroad. I lived in Madrid. Eventually got my master's in art business in London. So, my goal was like eyes on the prize, get out.
You got out.
I got out. I did it. That's
pretty far away and pretty different, right? So,
I guess I was searching for that, as part of my identity, as a feather in my cap, I guess. And I'm so glad I did it. It broadened my horizons. And I was, I always went to these places where I didn't know anyone before. And it was hard a lot of the time. It was not, it sounds so glamorous and fun and exciting. And it absolutely was. And I learned so much. But, there were times when I would get very lonely. And it was hard starting over so much. But I have no doubt today that is what has given me or has developed my character and my grit, and being able to just get thrown into a situation, much like I was with the distillery, and just persevere.
So you ended up in New York City after you finished your degrees, right?
Mm-hmm,
you were
correct.
Working in the city?
I was working in Manhattan, living in Manhattan. My aunt moved there in the 70s, so I did have a bit of a landing pad. My cousins grew up there, but that was, the second I studied AP art history at boarding school in high school, that I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be in the art world, be in a gallery, because it seemed so, I romanticized it. It seemed so glamorous, and there were definitely aspects that were very fun. And, ultimately my last job, after working in a couple galleries and directing, and I worked for an art advisor, and I got paid to go look at art shows and galleries, and with a critical eye, and write about them. But I was like, oh my gosh, is this really my life? And to be sure, working in small galleries is no easy task. And it can be pretty demeaning, and you are paid nothing, especially for New York standards. Yeah. So you really have to love it to stick with it. And I did. But I remember thinking, I was working for an art advisor, a very prominent art advisor. That was my last job. I had it for about 6 months when COVID hit. But I remember a couple months before COVID thinking, I was sitting at the desk in the office, beautiful office, and thinking, I'm not really being challenged to my fullest extent. I love it. And I'm committed, and it's amazing, and I have the best job of any of my peers that went to grad school with me. Undoubtedly, I had the ultimate job. I was really rising the ranks. But I remember thinking, I could do more. I could really be pushed more. But there was a part of me that was scared to be. I was comfortable. It was, why would I seek that out when, I could do this for a few years? And I was in a serious relationship with someone that actually I met in New Orleans, and they chased me down in New York, and I took him back. And, I just started thinking about our future, and, can we sustain a living this way?
In the big city? In
the big city. And then COVID hit, March 2020, and we were locked down. We were stuck in our apartment, and I remember thinking, we were toying with the idea of going upstate, and a family member was like, well, why don't you get down to Alma? It's really nice this time of year. Upstate New York is not. Just rent a car, drive the whole way through, just sanitize when you go to the gas station. That was our only stops. And we just, 10 days into lockdown, we were like, let's go. So hopped in the car, drove all the way through in 24 hours exactly.
Wow.
And
headed home?
Headed home.
Now, how long were you planning on staying?
Oh, literally, I said, we might as well just go down there and we'll just ride it out for a few weeks while this thing blows over. And I told my boss at the time, like, I will be back, ready in the office in a few weeks if need be. And of course, it was the every 2 weeks. And, and it became clear this is not temporary. And so she formally furloughed me about a month in. And at that time, the distillery operations fell onto my dad's lap.
So the distillery had been started
by my cousin.
By your cousin.
By a cousin of mine at the time.
Now back
in 2017.
So when it started, it was Caneland?
Correct.
Caneland.
It was Caneland, and my cousin, about a year and a half in, he stepped back. My dad took over operations. We ran into a trademark issue with the name. A Caribbean company had a rum called Cane Island, and that was too close within the same class of spirits. So rather than fight it, the lawyers advised it would be best to just rebrand. So we took that opportunity, rebranded as Three Roll Estate, kind of bringing it to the process and our single estate status, which is very rare, and really going with that and the cane to glass approach, the premiumized approach. But nonetheless, a rebrand is tough. Only a year and a half into the business. So 19, that was essentially what that entire year was devoted to that. And it was a setback at the end of the day. Even though it was seen as an opportunity as well, it was still a setback.
So the rebranding was done the year before you...
Yes, 2019. Got it. Come March 2020, after a year of kind of inflated growth, premature growth as far as team expansion goes and hiring goes, COVID hit. So, sales are kaput. Spirit sales are dependent on hospitality. I mean, especially for craft spirits,
So people weren't gathering.
And while liquor stores saw, booming sales, people are going in there and they're going to get what they know.
Right.
So the bartenders in the on-premise, they're our storytellers. Okay. They're our outlet. They're our avenue to the public. And we lost that entirely. Entirely. Couldn't do samples in a grocery store or anything and teach people there. So it was just a wiping of the slate, essentially. Again, we didn't know if we were going to make it.
Yeah. So you come back to that. You come back to the immediate effects of COVID, which was just shut down.
Yep. And I'm seeing my dad, we would spend every morning out on the front porch because at first we didn't want to be inside together because I just came from New York, the hotbed.
Right.
And we would work out on the front porch together or he would work and I would, post on Instagram for my art consultant job and feel like I wasn't doing enough. So I started, just eavesdropping on my dad's conversations on the phone, and we were getting into sanitizer production and trying
that's just one of the byproducts of the process.
In a way, yes. I mean, essentially, when you distill a spirit and you distill it at that high enough proof, that's neutral is what we call. That's 190 proof or above. That's vodka, essentially. It's a sanitizer. It's neutral. It's no flavor, no smell. When you go at that high enough proof, you're getting rid of all the flavor and smell, hence vodka.
Right.
And that's also a cleaner and a sanitizer, so long as it's done in a formula and a recipe that's FDA approved. And so that's what we got into, just to help subsidize our loss of alcohol sales.
How did that work?
It worked temporarily, but of course, every other distillery was doing it. And we were, kind of on the wave, the end of the wave of it, and then the bottom fell out. Purell got their stock back, and then there was just an oversupply of sanitizer, and then we were left with a huge amount of inventory of it. And I know many other distilleries that are still sitting on it, as are we. But we're no longer legally able to produce it or sell it. It was just a temporary exception during that shortage. So I've been able to sell it just as neutral spirit bulk sales, bit by bit. But it's interesting how it helped at first, and then it became an encumbrance. A burden.
When did you see things start to transition back to?
Well, I don't want to glaze over the struggle that was the remainder of 2020, because it was without a doubt the hardest time in my life. I thought I knew challenge and struggle, and but going back to that day, I was sitting at the desk in New York, like, I'm not being challenged enough. Well, you get what you wish for, let me tell you, because I saw my dad struggling with this. He had done his thing. He turned around the sugar business with Alma, became a legend, as you've heard, and he's nearing 70. He's like, this is not my bag. Like, I don't market brands. Like, I'm bulk, Right. Through my work in the art world and having done art business, but also, marketing and just thinking of things, of branding like that. I said, okay, you need help. I'm here. Like, forget my career I've been working toward for 12 years. I'm needed here. And this is my dad. This is my family. Because my entire extended family essentially is invested in the distillery, and so is Alma. And so it was like this call of duty that I'd never felt before. And
we got a script for a movie here. This is good stuff.
And God. I just, it was kind of, that's that moment, like the when you were talking to Darren or Daryl, who said, I looked around and I realized that was that moment for me. And I realized, it was just like this sense of this movement, this sense of terrifying calm that was just like, I got to do it. Okay, let's just,
I
called my boss.
Huge step. Because like you said, your career, which was just, really exciting, in that it was doing exactly what you wanted to do and very much different than how you grew up. Now to come back in the worst of times for this distillery, with the COVID.
Literal worst of times.
And that is fascinating.
Yeah. Maniacal is what you had to be. And
but
I guess
wasn't there a sense of, like, so many options otherwise were kind of impacted by COVID? I mean, even if you considered looking elsewhere, the whole world was upside down, right? So it's just like, it's really amazing that, that opportunity was there for you, and unfortunately it wasn't good timing, but the whole world was kind of upside down. So
absolutely. I mean, it's a privilege to have had the opportunity, no matter how downtrodden it was. Yeah. And I'm very aware of that and thankful for that. And all I learned through that struggle for the rest of the year, because no matter how creative I wanted to get, around every turn there was a impediment. And whether it was with pickup or we couldn't do to-go cocktails, and because we're a manufacturer, we can't also have a kitchen license, or because we have manufacturing, retail, and bar, we couldn't have that fourth license of a kitchen. So we didn't get, even though we weren't a full-blown bar, we're an educational space, essentially. And that's what I've tried to turn it into, a fun educational space. We did not have the same concessions as restaurants did during the lockdowns. And it was very hard, and very, very hard. And it did not let up. And I did not see a change in the tide until about March 2021, April, when after the vaccine came out, restrictions let up, people were coming out more. And it was, I'll be honest, up until that point, and even past that point, we didn't know if we would, I didn't know, I was having to run the operation I didn't know if we were going to be open the next day.
Right.
Frankly. And that was hard.
That makes for a long year.
Exactly. Yeah. It was a really long year. And I hit rock bottom personally, on a personal level. Luckily, I had my partner, my now husband, who moved back with me, and and helped get me through it. My dad helped get me through it. He would tell me stories of when he felt the same way. It kind of makes me emotional. But he would tell me stories with Alma, and he felt the same way. And when he would be out in his little garden plot that he has next to some of the cane rows, late at night, just on the tractor, this 1950s red McCormick tractor that he keeps restored. And he said he would just cut the tractor off. It's past dinner, and he would just go out there at night just to work out the stresses, and he would just cut it off and just start crying and bawl crying and just pray. He would tell me that story, and on the way to work, and I call him, I'm like, I don't think I can do it, Dad. I don't think I can keep going. And he said, I felt the same way, and you just have to keep going. And I did. And things started to turn around for us. And in 21, with the vaccines, I just kept going. And the week that we were going to essentially say, we don't think we can keep going anymore. Hey, shareholders, y'all want to step up, or y'all got any ideas? I got a call about a potential partnership, and they said, we're interested, and we can provide capital and branding expertise and marketing expertise. And actually, we are about to close that deal next week.
Oh my goodness.
But it was that week and I got that call, and we were about to send a letter out. I wasn't always a religious person, I'll be honest, but after hitting that lowest low, and then the timing of all of that, and having that hope just appear so suddenly when it was the end, it really changed the course of my spirituality.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. And it has since. And the way bottom left to upper right charts of our sales in the past year, we broke a company record last year in sales, and we're doing it again this year. We've already beat last year's totals. We have already matched them halfway through the year, and we're about to close this partnership. We have a lot of exciting things coming up, adding new premium lines, and it's amazing.
That's fantastic. Hannis T. Bourgeois provides accounting services, litigation support, as well as tax and assurance services to companies and individuals throughout the region. With offices in Baton Rouge, Denham Springs, New Orleans, and Hammond, their team of professionals have a wide range of specialized expertise and give personalized attention to each client they work with. HTB serves all types of business structures, including corporations, private businesses, startups, individuals, and more. So call them today to learn how they can help you. Reach out to them by phone or learn more at their website, www.htbcpa.com. A little testimonial here. HTB has been my accounting firm for over 30 years and have guided my initial company from startup to expanding to numerous operating companies. HTB has provided guidance in helping us expand across the U.S., doing business in more than 30 states. Flat out, HTB has made all the difference in the world to our business. This podcast is sponsored by NAI Ladder & Blum, Louisiana's leading commercial real estate firm, offering expertise in every discipline, including office, industrial, retail, multifamily, and corporate services. Their agents guide you through the real estate process from start to finish, using a host of marketing, prospecting, and analytical technologies. As leading entrepreneurs, your valuable time and resources should align with the most trusted name in commercial real estate, NAI Ladder & Blum. Learn how they can work for you at www.ladderblum.com. I haven't asked this question, but how is it or why is it that y'all went into the rum business? Mm-hmm. You mentioned it started in 2017. Mm-hmm. What's the story there?
So the idea for it actually began as early as 2012, 2013, when my cousin and his wife at the time went to a wedding at the C.O.O. Rum Distillery in Central America. And they were there talking with the other guests, etc., and they were telling them about Alma, and essentially everyone was like, wait, you own sugarcane fields, and you own the mill, and you don't make rum? I mean, it was like, what are you doing? And so that really spawned the idea for them, and they got going on it. And we didn't start producing and open the doors until 2017. My father and Alma and my whole family was supporting it and interested in it, even though they're not necessarily big rum drinkers. It was just, you think about the trajectory of the sugarcane industry as a whole, and like we talked about earlier, in 1990 there were 18 mills. Now there's 11, and that's just going to keep consolidating in that way. So diversification is something at the forefront of my dad's mind. So he got behind it, and we have this supply agreement with Alma, and we get to not only access fresh sugarcane juice, which very few distilleries outside of Martinique, an island in the Caribbean that's known for this cane juice style of rum, also called agricole, which is French for agriculture. So in the States, it's even a less likelihood that someone can use this raw sugarcane juice. Right. And we were the first ones in the state to do it. Now there's a few others, which I think is great, but we are the only ones doing it that owns the fields, the crushing process, all the way to the distillery. So, and we're one of the only ones in the country.
So the process was there. The process was happening, right? The cane's being crushed, the juice is being created. Mm-hmm.
But the unique opportunity is that in a normal big mill, you're getting cane from all over, from all your growers. Right. Because we have our own fields, we can isolate that cane and use a separate mill, essentially, smaller crushing mill, to isolate that juice from cane that comes from field 45 and 46, for instance. And it's this 285 variety. And 45 and 46 is behind my grandmother's house. And we leave that field untouched by any kind of ripener or crop dusting. We let it ripen naturally, because cane doesn't naturally ripen here in Louisiana until, late October, because it needs cool, dry air to start ripening naturally. On a huge industrial level, that's just not feasible, but it is on a smaller scale, like with the distillery.
Got it.
And making cane juice rum. So that's definitely our flagship product.
From the cane juice.
From the raw cane juice.
And so what products do you make? You've got a number of different styles of rum that Three Roll produces.
Yes.
And what comes from the cane juice? Which of those products?
Our agricole, our cane juice rum. So we have an unaged version out in the market. Eventually we'll have an aged version. And that cane juice is so special because it's a very volatile product, and it will start turning or oxidizing and become unusable in about 6 hours.
Wow.
Yes. And I mean, even if you just cut cane and you open up those stalks to air, for instance, the small billets, the small pieces, about 6-inch pieces that go into our cane yard at Alma, if our power goes down after a hurricane, we have 36 hours for that cane to be viable.
Wow.
So, it's never a dull moment in the Louisiana industry, but once it's juiced, it's even less time. It's 6 hours. So we can actually get that cane to our distillery and fermenting under our terms, because it'll ferment on its own, but then you have just lots of off flavors and weird stuff going on. So we want to control the fermentation with our own yeast, so we can get it to the distillery in 90 minutes.
And the yeast, when you're adding the yeast, that happens at the distillery?
Correct. And that starts the process of fermentation, which is needed for any alcohol, no matter what you're making, wine, beer, spirits. And that is the process where the alcohol actually is made. Yeast eat sugar, whether it's sucrose, glucose, or fructose. In the case of rum, we want mostly sucrose. And so it will start eating that. What it produces when it eats sugar is alcohol and then carbon dioxide as a byproduct. So that carbon dioxide off gases, and then we'll let it run for about 5 days. Fermentation can be any range of time. You want to control it. It determines flavors, how long you do it, how fast you do it, the temperature at which you do it. That is determining all our flavors. in the end product. Distilling does too, but once we get the sugars in there down to zero, we have our maximum amount of alcohol. It's about 12% in that tank, and then we're going to pump that over to the stills. And that's, what beer does and wine does, they stop after it's done fermenting. They do it in a different way. Us distillers like to call wine and beer makers quitters because we keep going and we distill it down into a strong spirit.
So you mentioned agricole. That's your premium rum.
Yes. So that's going to be, we use 3 substrates at the distillery from the mill. I'll go ahead and say 2 because we use the cane juice for our agricole, and then we use our molasses.
Right.
However, and that's what 99.9% of rum in the world is made from, molasses.
Right.
However, it's made from final molasses, C molasses, which means it's from the 3rd boiling.
ABC.
We have A, B, C, boilings 1, 2, and 3. The highest quality molasses is coming from that 1st boiling, A molasses. No other rum distillery I know of, whether we're talking Bacardi, Don Q, whomever, all the way to your craft distillers in the Caribbean and U.S. alike, are just using 100% A molasses, except for us.
Wow.
We are the only ones that I know of. And that's, of course, it's more expensive, but it's just access. No mill wants to give up their A molasses. There's plenty of sugar left in there to crystallize.
I see.
So they don't want to sacrifice that profit at such a small level because, distilleries are using a minute amount of product compared to what large-scale mills are selling.
And that's where your dark rum comes from?
That's where our white rum, our dark rum, and ultimately our flavored rums come from that A molasses. Grade A, Class A, 100%. So you're really going to see a huge flavor difference, a quality difference. Even our unaged white rum has a different flavor than your, leading competitor on the shelf, Bacardi. It's not as stringently just sweet. And rum to me even has always been like sunscreeny. Maybe it's just the association of tropical beach drinks, but there's a lot more body and character. For me, when I sip the white rum, there's a smokiness to it because I'm getting that molasses flavor. It's still coming through. It's not totally washed away. And it transports me directly into the mill at the height of grinding season. It's cold out. You're just smelling all of that molasses cooking and that fresh sugar coming out, and that's what it tastes like to me.
God.
And while our cane juice rum, the agricole, that is like late summer, as a kid, running away into the sugarcane fields, chewing on sugarcane, and just the taste of that fresh, bright, vegetal juice coming out, and you're just sucking it down, and that's where I'm transported to when I take a sip of our agricole.
Oh, that's so good. So descriptive.
Yeah, I mean, it just is.
It's so interesting. You got spiced rum, the red stick rum, the cinnamon flavored Louisiana.
So that all comes from our white rum. It uses white rum as a base. An interesting thing about white rum is that in the Caribbean, in most Caribbean countries, it has to be aged legally for 1 year minimum and then filtered to get whatever color out that it gained from the barrel. That's because the quality of their molasses is so bad, they make the distilleries age it to smooth it out a little bit and then just filter it so that it's still quote unquote white rum. We do not age. It's not filtered. It's straight from the still, proof down to a bottle proof and straight to the consumer. So that's that aspect of authenticity and honesty that we really embody.
So that, direct from the distillery is on your white rums, right?
It's all straight from the still, and then when you get into aged rum, dark rum,
right?
Even dark rum is a misnomer that people don't realize because our Caribbean neighbors are adding flavoring to it, even sugar sometimes. What's seen as some of the most premium dark rums, and look, I don't care. I'll call them out. Zacapa, Diplomatico. That has coloring and even sometimes sweetener added to it. Whereas what we aim to do, and this is kind of actually going to come out of our new partnership, and we're not going to do another rebrand, but we're going to drop another line of products that really, and the labeling will just make it more clear what is inside the bottle. Because right now, 3-roll dark rum is just aged. The color only comes from the barrel, but that's just not clear to the consumer. So we really want to, I'm excited about kind of creating a new line. We're still going to have 3-roll, but a new line of products that are my own, that I've had control over the development of and the name, and we're going to be launching September 1st, and we're going to have a beautiful 2-year minimum age straight rum, just aged in new American oak, just like a straight bourbon is. We'll have, and we're going to raise the proofs on what the current 3-roll products are, so it's just going to be our premiumized sipping line, if you will, because people don't realize you can sip white rum that is of this high quality on ice. It's my favorite way to drink it.
Very, very cool. I've learned so much. I wanted to ask you about aging, but I think I'm getting it now. Mm-hmm. You do age your dark rums and barrels. What's the longest that you product that you've aged that you've sold in your lines?
3 years.
Yeah.
We have older product. You know, you never know the life that the rum is going to take on. So we're always tasting, and we have some that's almost 5 years, but we've had different distillers who filled them, and you know, we have to think about who we want to be moving forward. So a barrel that was filled 5 years ago might not be where we're trying to go as far as flavor profile goes, but then you can get into blending and turn it into something that we can get with. And that's what, you know, while I'm running the operations and forming partnerships and new branding and getting out there and selling, we're all as a team tasting together out the barrel, doing different blends and components of different barrels to try and achieve a flavor that we want.
Yeah, it all sounds so creative.
Yeah.
It's so exciting.
It is.
So how are you doing sales?
We have to adhere to the 3-tier system here in Louisiana, which is the supplier, and then you have a distributor, and then the retailer, and they sell to the consumer. So the retailer in either case can be a restaurant, bar, or grocery store or liquor store. And that's the avenues that we go to market. The only area where we're able to sell direct to the consumer is on our tasting room premises. So that is where you can come in, take a tour, listen to our story, see the barrels, taste from the barrel, and buy the product directly from us.
Are you building a sales team?
We have a sales team. I have a director of sales. I have a area manager in New Orleans as well as in Baton Rouge. So we are a team of 3, and we've developed a very strong strategy in how we engage the consumer as well as the retailers, because we're with R&DC. So, you know, they have the biggest brands in the world. And so we have to pull our weight, get the demand from the consumer and retailer to go make their, you know, from the retailer to go make their purchase with R&DC. You know, so it's kind of it's a dual effort. You know, they're not going to do all the work for us, neither, you know, nor should they. So
it has been so cool learning about your business. It's so, just like with so many others that I talked to, but there's so much more involved than, you know, what
always
you can
is.
imagine. I've read that you were kind of working on this idea of a rum trail, you know, like there's a bourbon trail type thing in Kentucky and a lot of places where it's Napa or even the Texas Hill Country, you know, where a bunch of wineries will, you know, come. I think there's like 60 now in around Fredericksburg in the Texas Hill Country, and it just turns into this massive tourist attraction. You know, with the sugarcane and the milling. There's a few rum distilleries here in the state, but do you see that as having some potential?
I am going to make it my career goal to make it come to fruition, because I love this state. I love Louisiana, and there is so much unlocked potential for it and its people that I think something like a rum industry would directly benefit, not just through, through tourist dollars, also through jobs, but it will take a lot of work in legislation. Believe it or not, as much as we love to drink down here, it is pretty difficult for a distillery to survive based on, anything from our inability to sell direct to consumer at a small level. I love our distributor. Once you get big enough, you need that 3-tier system, absolutely. But for instance, being able to sell at a farmer's market. I mean, we are farm to table. You can't get more. I mean, and our festivals, but also certain tax breaks, like state excise tax breaks per case. We should get a break for that because we're supporting farmers. We're creating jobs.
Absolutely.
Even Bacardi gets a tax break in Puerto Rico for being local, and we should get one too. Yeah. They don't necessarily need it, frankly. But so it's making small changes like that I'm reaching out to our representatives. I actually had a great conversation with the Lieutenant Governor, Billy Nungesser, at the LRA convention over the weekend, and we see the vision, and he's on board with it, and I'd love to get more people aware of what it could mean for us. Look at Kentucky bourbon. Look at Napa wine. I mean, those industries are relatively new.
Right.
There's a playbook, and it will take time and perseverance, but it's something I'm no stranger to. Yeah. So I actually am very excited about that aspect of my career and feeling like I'm doing something bigger.
As you were saying that, I was thinking, if there's anyone that could do this, that could bring all this together over time, it would be you with, what you started talking about, watching your parents growing up on the farm and your parents' perseverance over decades and times where it may have seemed hopeless and crying on the tractor to, glory days of, maximum efficiency, but that perseverance, that strong work ethic, and you're the one to do it. So best of luck with that. I appreciate you coming in, Olivia, and talking with us and learning so much about your business, but the industry as a whole is just very, very fascinating. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Okay. One of the things I love about this podcast is talking to people like Olivia and learning about their businesses. And her business just was so complex. There's so much involved, from the farming, the growing the sugarcane, to the milling and the distillation and the actual selling of their product. And I just found it all very, very fascinating. And I loved how real she was and how raw she was about the challenges that she went through post-COVID, in particular, trying to get the business off the ground and just getting knocked down one punch after the other. But she hung in there, and that perseverance that she grew up watching her parents, go through the challenges in their businesses, and that paid dividends. And now we see great things coming from their business. Very excited for her, and I loved listening to her conversations. Great storyteller. So we appreciate her coming in. We appreciate you guys watching, and we'll catch you next time. We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. They can be found online at b1bank.com. The Next Entrepreneur is produced by Propel Productions. You can find more information at propelyourstory.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Next Entrepreneur podcast and hit the bell for notifications. You can also follow us on social media. The links are in the description below.